Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for this third and last session of the Daylight Awareness Week. In the last 2 days, we have learned a lot about the health benefits of daylight, about, for example, how adequate exposure to natural light is essential to align our body clock with the external world, and how this can help us improve, for example, the quality of our sleep and our health and our well-being in general. We also have learned that daylight and its disinfection powers can even help us protect ourselves against certain viruses and bacteria, and even help us treat certain diseases. And beside these health aspects, it is well known that sunlight is also a powerful source of energy, of clean and renewable energy. So considering all this, the question that arises today for today's discussion is, how can we apply all this scientific knowledge to make our built environments healthy and sustainable? So how should daylight be integrated in the design of our cities? And to discuss this topic, the Daylight Academy has invited a very interdisciplinary panel of experts that you will discover in a few moments. But before we start, I just want to say some words about what is the Daylight Academy for those who don't know the organization. And I will just share my screen. So the Daylight Academy is an international and interdisciplinary exchange platform for scientists with very different backgrounds, for architects, engineers, artists, and actually for all kinds of professionals involved in daylight research or especially interested in the daylight-related topics. And through this interdisciplinary approach, we want to encourage innovation and generating new and creative research ideas. Another important topic or another important goal of the Daylight Academy is to disseminate the knowledge and create more awareness about these questions. And that's why we organize this event, this Daylight Awareness Week. I also want to stress that all of you as participants, you are an essential part of the discussion today. Your thought, your question will be really at the heart of the debate. So we don't hesitate to ask all your questions. You can write them at any time using the Q&A, the question and answer tool that you can find at the bottom of your screen. And the advantage of this Q&A feature compared to the chat is that you can have a look at the different questions of the other participants and like the question that you find particularly interesting. And this question, or the question with the most likes, will appear at the top and will be prioritized. So this will help the moderator, and that's why we ask you to use this Q&A for the question and not the chat. And if your question is specifically directed to one speaker, please indicate her or his name at the beginning of the question. So this will also help the moderator and make her job a bit easier. Another important thing I would like to mention is that besides the speakers, we also have an illustrator with us today. Her name is Marina Roa. And she will be following the whole panel discussion and translating the main messages in a nice and visual way. And of course, she will also share her drawings with us at different moments. For your information too, please note that this webinar is being recorded and that we are also live on YouTube at the moment. The video will of course be available on the Daylight Academy website in a few days if you are interested. And another last information, also very important, is that we will end this webinar with a quiz today. And of course, you can all participate, and there is even a prize awaiting the winner. So it is worth to stay until the end. So I think now we can start with the roundtable, and I am pleased to introduce the moderator of today, Marilyn, Professor Marilyn Anderson. Marilyn is full professor at EPFL in Lausanne and head of the Laboratory of Integrated Performance in Design. With a background in physics, her research focuses on performance as a driver for design with an emphasis on daylight. Before joining EPFL, she was a professor at MIT, has been the Dean of the School of Architecture, Civil and Environment Engineering at EPFL, and she's also co-founder of the consulting startup Oculite Dynamics. So it's a great pleasure and an honor to have her facilitating this panel discussion. Marilyn, please, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Lydia. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you here today, with the regret of not seeing your faces, which I hope are smiling and radiant like daylight is. So it will be a pleasure to moderate this exciting session, the third of three. And before we get into the heat of the topic, which will be about daylight for healthy and sustainable living spaces, and you will see that this will pertain to a very large range of perspectives. I would like to get you engaged in this session to some extent, and basically to know a little bit more, and that all of you know a little bit more who is joining us. I can see that you're about 120 at least joining us today, so this is wonderful. So where are you joining us from? And this is, so the way to answer this question is by going to www.menti.com. I would recommend you to use your phone rather than your computer, so that you can see the results directly online. So if you go to menti.com on your phone and use the code 1928318, I can see there are already several answering. We will see where you are joining us from. It seems that currently Brazil is a hotspot of daylight, which is wonderful to see. Stockholm, Switzerland, Spain, Germany, they seem to be the so some cite their cities, some cite their countries. This is all fine. It's nice to have a diversity of provenance. And so just to get you up to speed as well, we would like to just see informally how important it is daylight to make your living environment healthy and sustainable. So it seems we have daylight advocates in the room, in the virtual room. So nobody right now attends a daylight webinar and thinks it's irrelevant for health or sustainability, which I think is a good sign. It's also nice to see that there are some nuances in the enthusiasm. And so this is wonderful to see. And then we would be very interested to know what you hope to get out of this session, and to just share with us what did get you to join us here. Light, inspiration, health, new info, happiness. That's very nice to know. No more experts, current trends, inspire comes a lot, knowledge and info. So I hope we will be able to get some information out. This is really nice to see that, such a positive attitude and sort of a thirst for more knowledge and more information. So thank you so much for engaging already in this session. And so right now I would like to introduce each of the panelists that will be joining us today, tonight, this morning, this evening, depending on where you're joining us from. And so I would like to start with Christina Hemauer and Roman Keller, who will be joining us now. They form an artist duo in Zurich with a focus on the concept of energy, in particular the history of oil and its competing alternatives. And more recently, they have become interested in the human-nature relationship facing climate change and have developed a very interesting project on the color of the sky, which they intend to extend over decades of measuring sky spectra from museum roofs. So a warm welcome to Christina Hemauer and Roman Keller. And I would like to invite them to say a few words themselves.
Hello.
Hello. Thanks a lot, Marilyn, for the short introduction.
For the start, we'd like to show some pictures for the next 30 seconds, uncommented, just to show you a little bit of a visual introduction to our work. Okay, here we are.
So do you want to say anything more, or was it more of a contemplative introduction?
Well, actually, we didn't want to talk about the pictures, because if we start to talk about it, it goes for hours. So let's start with our statement, no?
Yes.
Sure.
So as you mentioned, that, for example, that we live already under an Anthropocene phenomenon leads our discussion to the point that it looks like that we have a nature-culture dualism. And this nature-culture dualism, it looks like that we are responsible more and more for both of them, for nature and culture, or especially nature. And while preparing this talk, we came up that the outside is mostly referred to the nature and the inside to culture. So maybe we should or could get a new understanding of the outside-inside nature-culture dualism if we leave that away, put it together, and think about new behaviors and maybe new living spaces.
And also in our discussion, we always think about a more gradual approach. You know, it's not going out, but maybe going to the garden or going a little bit out, and not really a hard border between the building and the outside.
Thank you very much for this statement. We will have the opportunity to go back to it and to have a more lively discussion about it, but it's very nice to set the stage with these preliminary ideas into the debate. So many thanks, Christina and Roman. I would like now to introduce our next panelist, Jasmine Joshi. She's a plant ecologist who's working as a professor for landscape ecology at the University of Applied Sciences Rapperswil, which is near Zurich in Switzerland. She has worked for many years in nature conservation research with a kind of a dedicated focus on ecosystem services and biodiversity. And now she teaches ecology to future landscape architects with a hope to regreen our cities properly. So a warm welcome to Jasmine, and maybe Jasmine, I can invite you to also say a few words.
Okay, thank you very much, Marilyn. As you already said, I belong to the outside world. I'm dealing with plant ecology and plant biodiversity, and maybe I share my screen to show my point, if that works. Let's see. Share. Yes. So I'm interested in the ecosystem services that biodiversity provides us. So in connection with daylight, that means whether biodiversity or whether light is, has a different effect on us if it's filtered through canopies, for example. And it's for us, or in the landscape ecology, it's interesting to know whether a diversity of leaf forms, for example, of leaf patterns, has a different effect on us. Or, now it's the next slide, what studies show is that also blue spaces in our environment have an effect, or combined blue-green spaces. There was a study last year that showed, for example, that people calm down really amazingly if they have a blue-green space in their neighborhood. There are studies that show that green spaces in cities enhance cognitive abilities of children, or there are studies that show that the people in hospitals recover more, recover faster if they have outside windows, and that enable them to look into the green space, into green spaces. So that's, yeah, in a nutshell, the subjects that are interesting to me. So now, stop share. Okay.
Thank you very much, Jasmine. This was a great, again, introduction to this interaction between nature and our human needs through light. And we will, of course, go back to this very important topic. So it's a pleasure to introduce our third panelist, Hubert Klumpner. He's a professor of architecture and urban design at the Department of Architecture at ETH Zürich since August 2010. He also co-founded the architecture firm Urban Think Tank, UTT, with Alfredo Brillenburg in Caracas, Venezuela. And his research focuses on informal urbanism and its effects on the city. So a warm welcome to Hubert, who I also invite to say a few introductory words.
Yes, with big pleasure, Marilyn, and to all the other guests, welcome. I'm very happy to share with you a few ideas, a peek preview, so to speak, in a wealth of work that we are doing. Daylight is an aspect which can't be deducted from every activity, basically, that we're doing. And I want to make 2 points here. One about climate. At the end of the day, we are not inhabiting a planet, we're inhabiting a climate that conforms planet Earth, a very thin layer all around the planet. And this layer, which is in this time of Anthropocene, as we just heard, also dependent on our capacity to not only repair, but maybe to build climate. And I'm sharing with you here a picture of recent work that we're doing in Sarajevo in Bosnia-Herzegovina, the infamous, most contaminated capital city of Europe. And what we see there is, this is from measuring the air quality, that the quality of the atmosphere, talking here about inversion, weather landscape, fine dust, etc., contributes to the incapacity of daylight penetrating this layer in the atmosphere. And on the other hand, our building activity, which brings me to my second point, our building activity here, a picture from Cape Town about a housing project that Alfredo and I have been developing there, which is about the densification or the social environmental justice question of bringing in densification in this process of urbanization, which is at the core of our research, and how this is actually very quickly becoming a question of access to daylight. And this is not a new question. Already in Manhattan, when skyscrapers were invented in North America, basically, there was a struggle to allow daylight to be available for all people, all citizens in an urban environment. And we still haven't managed to solve this question. And I think this will be also in the next couple of years becoming again a very important issue, a very important question. Climate on the one hand side, and the human right to daylight and air, obviously, environmental and the social question for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Hubert. It's a great, different perspective, more urban related, and I'm sure it triggers thoughts and questions from the audience. By the way, speaking of questions, don't hesitate to already engage in the chat. I'm talking to the 140 participants by now, and really share your thoughts so that we can bring them up into the panel discussion in a little while. But before that, I would like to invite our next panelist, Brian Norton. He is an engineer and physicist. He's a professor at the University College Cork in Ireland, and he's the head of the energy research at the Tyndall National Institute. Previously, he was the president of the Dublin Institute of Technology, and his research about daylight is taken from a solar energy conversion perspective. So please give a warm welcome, silent, but warm nonetheless, to Brian. And Brian, please share with us a few words.
Okay, thank you, Marilyn. Daylight in buildings is a very big subject. It can be used in buildings using photovoltaics to convert sunlight to electricity. You can use solar panels, basically a simple copper plate with an absorber on it, to produce hot water, to produce space heating. And indeed, the light that comes into buildings gives the photosynthesis for the plants that might be in your room. Looking at it also, it can avoid the use of electric lighting, and that is critically important. Electric lighting constitutes some 15% of global electricity use, some 5% of greenhouse gas emissions, and even though you've got low energy lighting, electric light use is actually increasing by about 2% a year because more lighting is used. So how to use daylight successfully in buildings to reduce electric light loads is a major challenge. It's part of a general drive to achieve net zero energy buildings, near zero energy buildings, and that relates to how the building is insulated, how it's ventilated, etc. But critically, how daylight comes into the building. And in many new buildings, you can see a whole range of activities around where the apertures are, the plan of the building, particularly low-rise buildings, very successful solutions. But new buildings are only a tiny part of the building stock. So one of the big challenges is how, in the context of reducing electric lighting load, one deals with existing buildings, particularly deeper plan buildings, older buildings. So many challenges in seeking to see the economic, environmental, greenhouse gas mitigation, benefits of daylight, and indeed enhancing the physiological, psychological responses that they provide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian, which allows us to introduce our last but not least, as we say, panelist, Vis Justice. She is a chronobiologist and is a professor emeritus of the University of Basel in Switzerland. Her work has focused on light therapy for winter depression and the physiological effects of light in health and illness. And now her interests have shifted to also application of chronobiology in architecture and in daily life. So it's a great pleasure to have you with us, Anna. Please share a few words as well.
Thank you, Marilyn. And you may ask, what is a chronobiologist doing in a roundtable about healthy architectural environments? In yesterday's webinar, we heard how biological clocks tick and how light reaching the eye not only promotes vision, but also a host of non-visual functions, including circadian rhythms, sleep, mood, cognition, alertness, performance, learning, and memory. The clock in the brain needs to be synchronized or entrained every day to the day-night cycle, and this occurs primarily with light. But we now use light to treat winter and other depressions, to stabilize sleep for many clinical applications, which are being explored, such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. But we have to go back and think humans have extremely variable lifestyles and little regard for the demands of internal time. We work at night or remain indoors and rarely see daylight. We squeeze sleep into shorter and shorter time frames and still demand high performance at all times of day. Most of us get too little light during the day and too much light at night. With artificial lighting and heating, we don't adapt to the seasons. So we live in bad times for good entrainment. the consequences have emerged as clear social and medical problems. So you can understand how our built environment could affect every aspect of physiology and behavior related to the amount and quality of daylight and artificial light available indoors. For architects, of course, light has been a tool essential to architectural creation at the aesthetic and functional level. But only recently have the chronobiological effects of light entered the design discussion. The discovery of the blue sensitive photoreceptor and the important influence of non-visual light input on many brain functions has completely changed the lighting industry in the last 10 years. They have recognized the implications of different spectra and intensities of light that change across the day and coined the term human-centric lighting. I would also hope that this knowledge is changing architecture by reminding us that daylight is the most natural signal and not focusing exclusively on energy savings. I'm not sure how we should build a circadian house or an urban environment that incorporates the rhythms of the day and the seasons. But let's begin the discussion including the term chronoecology that might let us develop healthy living spaces.
Thank you very much, Anna. This is a great way to get into actually the complexity or the multidimensionality of daylight and of our needs in terms of exposure to daylight or to light in general, as a matter of fact. So if I start with you, as you're in the middle of the screen right now, and you talked about this rhythm between day and night, bright days, dark nights. Also, the timing of the light exposure matters a lot. So is the sufficient access to light during the day and the little access to light during the night both being a challenge, is it even possible in today's urban life and the way we actually live in cities with a clock that is shifted towards the evening, with indoor that is probably deprived from light, and outdoors when the sun is down that is probably too full of light? So how do you see this combination between what we evolved under the natural cycle of light and what we live in our cities? How, as a chronobiologist, could you sort of help or show what could be possible?
Well, I think the more we know about the important biological effects of light, the more we will pay attention to it in our built environment. And there are two ways of doing it. One would be to improve the buildings so that more daylight gets in. But the other way, of course, is called behavior. Teaching people to go outside. I always say, go outside for half an hour in the morning, no matter what the weather is, walk or bike to work, make sure you get outdoor light, which is incredibly much more intense than any inside light can be. The other thing is the lighted sky as night. We have lost the night sky. There are organizations like Dark Sky fighting to keep some part of the night dark, as well as changing the lighting in cities, focused down and not hitting the sky. But I think that's going to be a huge challenge in the future to bring these together. When we think, there's been an American study looking at light exposure of different areas by satellite. So light at night by satellite, and then questioning teenagers about their sleep. And those that had more external light in the environment of their houses and bedrooms, they went to bed half an hour later and had 10 to 12 minutes less sleep. So even something like light from the moon or the moon is natural, but light from the outside lighting can change sleep in young people.
Thank you. So you talked quite a bit about the night sky and I guess also the day sky and how much they influence us. And Christina and Roman, you have been working on that spectral changes of sky over time and intend to do that further, but with a perspective of climate change. And do you maybe see an influence of the built environment, like Anna was just saying, the fact that the way we illuminate our places and when we go further away from nature and therefore have less black nights, this affects us? So where do you see also, maybe during the day, your pictures seem to be mostly during the day, an influence of the built environment or the way we live in the built environment on the natural environment?
To be honest, we would rather love to make those pictures on a house where we don't see the built environment, because we asked some climate scientists how the sky is going to change, and they were not knowing
global climate change.
Yeah, and they were not sure if it's going to be brighter or bluer. And then we asked if it's measured, and they say no, color is not a relevant
scientific value.
Yeah, and then that's why we thought as artists we have to cover this. But we couldn't say if there's a big influence, or we did never look into that. We just saw during COVID, we saw how much less contrails we had in the sky, how much bluer the sky was. This is not a scientific observation, but an observation that not only we had, a lot of people had this. So we only saw that, and we're basically interested in the climate influence.
So it's very it was observed not only by us, but a lot of people, that the sky became dark, clear, bluer. So mainly, I think as well, because there were no planes. It would be interesting to have a look at these measurements during this period.
Yes, this change of the sky activity.
Actually, we know from the no-fly time after 9/11 that the ground got warmer during day and colder during night for each half degree of Celsius. So we know already that flying makes a change in the physical climate on the ground.
Yep. And so, Jasmine, maybe we can connect it even further to the interplay between daylight and actual natural elements. So there is the sky, and then there is how it interacts with like vegetation or water. So have you observed, or would you say that this interaction of daylight before it reaches us, if it goes through vegetation, through a forest, or it's reflected on water, something where it hits and really brings together the natural aspects with the sky, which is of course also natural, whether it affects us differently? Would you have some words about that as well?
Yeah, well, it's a big question. First, I was thinking about, I mean, we share with most organisms on Earth the circadian clock. So, I mean, not only us, we are influenced by daylight, but also most of the animals and plants. So in our cities, for example, there have been studies that show that even fish in little rivers, they are affected in their daily rhythm if they have night lights, or insects, that night active insects, if there is light from streets and so, they cannot become active, some of them. They're just waiting until it's getting dark and then they starve. Plants, on the other hand, they really can, they really somehow chemically notice the quality of the daylight that is coming through leaves from other competing plants. And if they in that way sense the presence of other plants, they change, for example, their growing patterns. So if there is if all the green waves or all the very energy active light red waves, for example, have been taken away by photosynthesis by competing plants, they notice that, and then they just grow to the plants. And with people, it's not so much actually researched, but as I said at the beginning, there are studies that show that we are influenced by light reflected from water. So it makes us calmer. And the same is true if we are affected, in the same way we are affected by light shining through leaves. So the green light we perceive, for example, but it's a good way to keep babies calm. Just put them under a tree.
Because they spent hundreds of thousands of years on the trees before being in buildings, maybe?
Yeah, probably.
Thank you very much, Jasmine. So we have a few inputs on this relationship between daylight and nature per se, and I would be very interested to know if the audience had also some things to ask, for example. So I have one question, for example, that is quite specific for Anna, actually, so really on chronobiology. It's about how much time should we get exposure to daylight on a daily basis to be healthier? So this is the $1 million question. Anna, good luck with that.
As I said before, a half an hour is the minimum of daylight, no matter what the weather. Get out regularly every day, if possible, as early as possible, and that will entrain your clock, synchronize it so that you're more awake during the day and that your sleep is better at night. Of course, you can go outside for longer during the day, and we know that more light, more daylight is important for improving the quality of sleep at night. It sounds so simple, but it's not.
Indeed, and it actually drives another question that also Laetitia Moreau asked regarding daylight savings time. Big debate, all of the chronobiology community has been gathering together, and including people like me, and I'm sure many of other people, to really engage in a debate that is scientifically based, evidence-based, and would drive us to choose the time closest to the solar time. So Anna, would you have more words into the urgency of that debate and decision?
Of course, it's a very important question. Even though you think 1 hour shift is only a tiny jet lag, if we live on the time zone, the solar time zone where we are, depending on latitude, of course, then we are more in sync with the sun, with light and dark. If we go on to summertime, which is a word that everybody loves, and that's why they want summertime, because it means we have more summer, but it doesn't really mean we have more summer. It means we have more light at night, but we have less light in the morning. So if we go on continuous summertime, there will be, depending on latitude, 6 months where people will be getting up and going to school and work in the dark, even though they think, oh, I'm having summertime and I'll be out in the evening. The chronobiologists go for standard time. However, we also have time zones that are totally weird. The people in Spain, everyone says people in Spain are late. It's not that they are late. The sun rises later for them, and therefore they synchronize at a later time of day. One should consider moving time zones back to more real sun and, yeah, sunlight zones.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if there is anything to do, is to sign any pledge you will see to try to get closer to solar time from a policy standpoint. I would like to move on to just a broader perspective on daylight as a kind of a multidimensional material. We know it is dynamic. We know it is to some extent unpredictable, despite the high predictability of sun cores. The cloud cover makes it quite unpredictable. It's abundant, but brings both heat and light. It can be uncomfortable. It can be welcome. It comes through windows, so it allows for views, so air. It affects us emotionally, physiologically. Anyway, there is a lot of dimensions that we find in daylight, and I would like to take it into a sort of a built perspective, maybe starting with Hubert. So when we know that daylight connects also to many other aspects of the built and the natural environment, like air quality and thus health, as we talked about, it's not just air quality, but actually even light is a health question itself. As a topic, when you go through all these projects on urban development, do you see it as a federating topic, like one where everybody agrees it can federate better urban development, or more as a diluted one because it's not defined enough, it cannot be put into a box, and therefore is hard to get enough attention? How would you say it may or may not influence urban development?
Yes, Marilyn, that's an excellent question. Obviously, urban development happens not only in cities. Urbanization is now clearly visible in many different environments. But if we stay for a moment in densely built cities, it becomes very clear that the architectural project is autistic. It tries to compete and get most daylight as it sees itself in a position of uniquely working itself in its given plot and environment. But if we're looking then at a city in its totality, in the density and in its anticipative capital, we very quickly learned that we need actually a code. We need sort of an agreement. This is less a building code than more a contract between equal players that to a certain respect, to a certain effect, respect also the needs and necessities of others. And we see that we need to sort of shape even orientation of housing blocks, depending what we just heard also from Anna, in which climate zone we are, in which area we are, not only obviously the area of the day, but also the point on the planet. And in that sense, we can learn a lot from more indigenous and vernacular architecture, how one also protects oneself from daylight. But I would maybe conclude by saying, during the time of modernism, it seemed that bigger and larger window spaces are just the better ways of designing a building. And a lot of our measures of how elegant or how beautiful a building is still sort of embedded in our way of thinking and looking at buildings. But we know also that it is a lot more important, perhaps, that is Brian's expertise, that we can incorporate also shading devices, that we can actually create a lot more dynamic ways of dealing with buildings in a temporary, not only in an absolute way, of sharing daylight and finding solutions that way to a lot of other necessities, from daylight to comfort, from health to the simple joy of being in a space, also in a space where we can regulate and where we can influence also the amount of daylight that we're getting. I think that this is coming up a lot in a solidarity concept in an urban environment where bottom up should meet top-down demands also on daylight. I think one of the very, very strong and often underestimated factors.
Thank you very much. You talked about shading, and so it was getting into really what makes architecture also in terms of the added components. And about that, I would like to maybe go to Brian and talk about daylight as a provider of light, obviously, but also of heat. Basically, daylight comes only from the sun. And so how would you say that daylight as a light source can position itself with regards to other renewable ways to provide either light, like through electricity generation from PVs, for example, or to provide heat, like through solar thermal collectors? All three are a way to use the sun as a source of either light or heat, and daylight is both. This is a more passive direct, but indirectly we can also deal with it in a more controlled way, I would say. So how do you see this trio of daylight electricity generation from PVs and heat through solar collectors interplaying in how we could think about buildings?
Yeah, I think it's important that they're optimized and they're not seen as competing, but seen as part of the solution. And it needs to come from an analysis of the energy use in the building. What is the electricity use? What is the hot water use? And what would be the electric lighting use, which could be displaced by daylight? And then designing the building from those perspectives. In other words, not design it from a technological perspective of say we've got to have PV or we've got to have solar water heating, but say what are the actual loads we need to meet and what are the optimum size of those loads. Now, a lot of the actual sizing will be to do with economics, will do with also a trend, and I mentioned it in my introductory words, towards nearly zero energy buildings, where the occupants of buildings are no longer just passive consumers of buildings, but are producing electricity and heat, particularly electricity through photovoltaics, and they're what's called prosumers. They're producing and consuming. And so the nature of the occupants' interaction with their building changes. But at a more practical level, they certainly having PV arrays and water heating arrays on the roof is practicable. There are systems now where you're combining PV and thermal in the same system, and that can work. And it's again driven by economic choice in terms of the value and timing of the electricity and the heat output. PV and solar thermal systems are predominantly on the south side of the building. Daylight can come from all angles, and that I think is an important point of one's looking at the building. They don't necessarily compete, and indeed the best locations for PV and solar thermal collectors are on the roof, whereas best locations for daylight, because you're trying to bring it into rooms, is on the facade. So there are natural forms that emerge from those kind of considerations. But I think the key thing is to look at it from an objective of what one's trying to achieve. The form follows function, an architectural cliche, but a very true one, and use that in the design process.
Okay, and I have a question from the audience to be even more specific, almost quantitative, about how much light energy, so I suppose how much of the irradiance gets actually lost when going through a window. So how much of it is maintained inside versus outside?
It's a very interesting question. My visual aid, a window. Say hello to a window. Say hello to light. When you're on there, it will depend what the transmittance of the glazing is. So this glazing has a transmittance of say 0.9, then 0.9 of the energy at a normal instance like that will get through the glass, but it will vary with instant angle. Now it remains pretty constant to an instant angle of about 60 degrees, then it diminishes to 0 when you're here. So that's how much comes through. Then once it's in the room, it will diminish with distance from the window. How much it diminishes will depend on the reflectivity of the walls within the room, and indeed whether one's introduced devices behind the window to try and deflect light to a light ceiling and project it further into the room. But at a normal instance, one could be losing maybe 10% of the light, and then there'll be and that will change with the sun angle.
Okay, thanks. I hope this answers the auditor's question. I would like to maybe go back to the health aspects, or maybe more the relationship between artificial light and daylight indoors. And of course, we can consider that daylight is kind of a human need or a human right. And Christina and Roman before had mentioned in their statement that there was this sort of permeability, this continuity that may emerge more and more between the inside and the outside, and this could probably be a good thing, or maybe it would be interesting to hear your thoughts about that. So with this spectral dynamics that you work on, and the way you want to make statements about climate change and how it can be experienced through the color of the sky, how do you see this, the need for permeability of our buildings to connect to the outside?
Interesting question. Actually, we always think if we alter the viewpoint that it's not nature culture anymore, it's everything is our culture, then we might get to a point where we think, oh, why are we not more outside, and how can we build the outside and the inside, or how can we connect those two to make it a more livable space? And you know, we have this impression that this simplification of culture nature is in our way, because the highest biodiversity was at about 1850, so before the industrialization. So it's not always bad that we interact in the outside or in the garden. We can be good gardeners as well.
And maybe it's a little bit like Hubert said, or also Brian, if you open up a space, you have a social turn in a way. We close houses as well, that we don't want that somebody breaks in or comes in unasked. So it's, for us, this is really part of the game, that our behavior is going to change, and that's, Brian, maybe something then form follows not function, then function follows again form, or I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hubert, would you maybe have something to add on this?
Yes, thank you. I think those are very interesting thoughts, Roman and Christina. One could extend them into the question, why don't we spend more time in public spaces, which are so much in the debate, because cities are obviously made out of buildings, but what is much more important for the question of daylight is obviously the space in between buildings. We admire sort of facades and individual objects, but what we really appreciate as an atmosphere is actually the space, and this is not sufficiently translated between qualitative and quantitative observations. FAR, floor area ratios, how tall buildings are relative to the plot that they stand on, not sufficiently expressed in cities yet. And I would say to allow people to spend more time outdoors, and everybody here in the audience can measure that in his own environment, it probably also needs a sort of a stronger work of being able to change public spaces. I'll leave you with one example. Only in recent times, sandboxes on playgrounds have shading devices. So often it is not only the availability of sunlight, but also the possibility to control it, that people stay longer and stronger outside and follow activities. And I think this, the possibility of, again, of more of an environment where that can be stronger designed and adjusted to people's needs, would allow people a lot longer to stay outside. Our spaces are too absolute. You know, at one moment you're outside, but then the space simply doesn't allow it. And I think in these areas that Roman and Christina also describe, in the immediate surroundings of houses, where we actually as individuals control this a lot more and do something about it, this attitude could be expanded to public space at large. It would draw a lot more people outside on the street, and maybe then also our apartments would get smaller again. You know, that I think it would have a lot of very interesting effects. So I'm looking forward to continue this discussion with you, Roman and Christina.
Yeah, so we have a lot of enthusiasm for public spaces. Anna encouraging us to go outside buildings, Hubert also, Christina and Roman. Jasmine, is there something you can recommend from a landscape architecture's point of view for these public spaces? How can we make them even more attractive, even better for us? First of all, they would drive us outside, but this driver could maybe be enhanced further through the kind of vegetation we choose?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, a big thing in landscape architecture is at the moment how to use plants to improve the microclimate in cities. So against the urban heat island effect, for example. So a lot of energy goes at the moment in selecting the right trees or planting a lot of trees, designing pocket parks, for example. So not only have the big parks in the city, but really small parks, and enabling enough green spaces for every inhabitant. For example, Zurich says that every inhabitant should have at least 8 square meters green space in its vicinity within, I don't remember, it's 300 or 300 meters walking distance. Yeah, so
like
definitely.
5 minutes.
Yeah, no.
5 minutes walking distance, probably. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, exactly. Thanks. And yeah, so at the moment in Switzerland and in mid-Europe, it's trees actually. That's the big thing. So get the shade and the atmosphere.
Yes, absolutely. And so we have, maybe I'll take one more question from the audience about density that can pertain as well to Anna as it could to Hubert, I guess. It's about this access to daylight. And so from a social perspective, and this is one of the questions from the audience, to talk about the responsibility of architects to make sure that people have access to light. And this links also to Anna's points about making sure that we go outside, but maybe also making sure that inside we can have good answers when it comes to mood, sleep, or performance in terms of the chronobiology aspect. So on the one hand, Anna, is chronobiology ripe enough to start answering those questions? And Hubert, can we enrich or engage differently in the debate, social debate of densely populated areas from daylight?
Anna, after you, please.
Well, in the last 10 years, we've learned a great deal about the effects of light on humans in terms of chronobiology and other effects of light on the non-visual system. And architects and lighting engineers would love to have a blueprint immediately how to build the best healthy buildings, but we're still in the stage of finding out further how can we do it and what is best. We don't have answers, but we're going in a direction where we already can say that this kind of, that more daylight is better, higher intensity light in the morning, warmer light in the evening. Don't sit in front of your computers longer for another 2 hours, because you'll get the blue screen effect keeping you awake and shifting your sleep. So I think we're in a very exciting moment where chronobiologists and physiologists have a lot to offer and need to do a lot of research in order to find out those blueprints that the architects, that we'd love to give the architects.
Yes, maybe to follow up a bit on the question of what Anna just said, it is unfortunately a fact that in particular poor neighborhoods are lacking daylight. If you're looking today at where most people live in the global south, where you have slums and areas struck by poverty, that is a phenomenon that obviously also existed in large cities in Europe. Take Paris, London, Berlin, Vienna. All these cities had places like that, and they were chronically lacking accessibility also for light and daylight. Only with the hygiene movement and with documentary photography and journalism, these conditions came to the foreground. I think today we cannot say that we don't know about those conditions anymore. Nevertheless, we have accepted that they exist. And to my mind, and this is also where a lot of our work is concentrated, our opportunity is to incrementally change that. We heard that before. I think Jasmin, somebody said it, that it is not necessarily about bulldozing everything down and rebuilding it. We can't afford it. But by knowing these things, and that is why knowledge production, I think from all the contributors here in the panel, is so important to understand also the different segments and to bring them together in one frame of how people live actually in cities, how they live in their environments. It will be necessary to understand that better and incrementally, if not radically, respond to it and have prototypes, test them over time. Also something what we heard, the time factors are very important to observe what happens in wintertime against summertime, how that affects heating, orientation, etc. And really bringing that knowledge back into policy making. I think science and technology needs to come in also from the experience of people on the street, from the experience of people living in cities, stronger into our regulations. There's often a misfit, and that we could fix. That is in our hands.
Absolutely. I think this is a nice way to close this panel session, or the Q&A part of the panel session. Thank you very much to all of you. I think it's a good time to have a visual perspective on what we have been discussing so far. So Marina will share her screen now and maybe say a few words about what she captured in the literal sense, in the many senses that it can have, to share with us how this debate can be translated visually. So Marina, the floor is yours, or the board is yours.
Thank you, Marilyn. Yes, there's been a lot of different concepts I've been trying to grasp. I'm going to share my screen so you can see. Sorry, there's something not.
This is the night. You captured the night, for sure.
Sorry, there was something saying I couldn't share. Can you see?
We cannot actually.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry about that.
No, I think we can. Now? Yes, well,
great.
So
here we are.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I got here all the panelists for today. And this was the first question that you launched the call with. How should daylight be integrated in the design of cities? There was this reflection on we are responsible for nature, and culture is including nature in now also as part. We were talking about how patterns affect us, how colors affect us. The quality of the atmosphere, how it contributes to the capacity of daylight to get through it. How to build buildings where we take the best of daylight as well. About energy. Chronobiology, how important it is to get some time for sun in the morning, and it will help us sleep. Wondering if the sky is bluer nowadays and if we lost the dark nights. And I'm almost done there. There was like a lot of demand and recalling the human need for access for light for everyone, and green spaces, and yeah, and to end, just to remember that we are not the only ones affected by daylight. Also plants and animals are there affected. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marina. I guess I speak for everyone in sharing that it's a absolutely wonderful and fascinating way to relive this discussion, almost with a a higher dimension, and sort of it triggers new thoughts, at least in me, and it's very inspiring to see these drawings to capture the essence of what we discussed. So thank you so much for this contribution, which really enriches this debate a lot. And so we were able to, thank you, include some of your questions, not all of them, unfortunately. There was so much to discuss, but I would like to ask you, our audience, again, it seems most of you are still here, which is wonderful to see, using the Mentimeter again, so the same website. What is basically, now that you have seen it in verbally and also what you have seen in drawings, and I see a comment that I want to share with Marina, amazing drawings. So to go back to Mentimeter and say, what is the main message that you're taking away from this webinar? In words, not in drawings, unfortunately, but you can draw and share it with us later. So we have learned by nature. I guess people have to still connect. So the code is 74929880. Daylight is a human right. The diversity of the uses of daylight, great. Vital role of daylight, chronobiology, life, and everyone should play a role in getting this importance to be at the forefront. It's complex, not easy. Nature is part of it. And it's kind of it makes a whole, it connects to health. The circadian house, very nice. The connection between inside and outside. A take-home message to go out, even if you're in a bad building, go out, and outside it's always good. So really this human nature rhythm, I think, came up very strongly, which is really great to see. Thank you all for your contributions. And thank you, Marina, again. So I think it's time to have some closing reflections from all of the panelists, also what they take home or took away from this discussion, this debate, and maybe a few words that they would like to add to the discussion. And let's take the inverse order in which they were introduced, and start with Anna this time.
Well, it would be very nice if architects and lighting engineers, as well as people who are building houses or planning cities, really started to think about the biological, the chronobiological effects of light and darkness, and try, we can't change our cities as they are, but try and develop buildings that allow the inside-outside barrier to melt, as Roman and Christina said, houses with atriums, that we register the seasons as something in our particular corner of the world, in every corner of the world, the seasons, the day length, let them into our lives more, then we would be more nearer nature in our civilized lives. And I really think chronobiology has something to offer to architecture and urban planning, and we hope that the collaboration will continue.
Thank you so much, Anna. I think we can all relate to that. So thank you for these closing remarks. Brian, can I ask you to also share what you get out of this and would like to share with the audience?
Thank you, Marilyn. Yeah, in a similar vein to Anna, I think in Daylight, I think it's important to embrace the multidisciplinarity of the topic, because you get some very surprising perspectives when you do that. If I give a very concrete example of that, I noticed in some of the questions of the Q&A, a lot of interest on shading and PV systems and things like that. And the answer to that question is an interesting combination of the technical and economic. Another visual aid, there's a PV system. If this PV system is shaded, so my hand shading part of it, what happens is there's a lot of bypass diodes here. The electricity goes around that part that's shaded. So a PV system can tolerate a lot of shade. In fact, the limiting factor is another thing in the system called the inverter that converts the DC DC to AC. And it has a threshold value. As long as you don't go below that, a PV system will continue to work even when it's shaded. So what's the issue where you say, well, how much shading can it take? It's an economic decision. One's invested in the PV system to produce a certain amount of electricity over its life and sized it to do that. And if it's half shaded all the time, it'll produce, say, half the electricity. So the issues to do with shading are not technical. They're actually to do with the economics, the investment, etc. So when looking at systems and looking at their engineering design, I'm using the PV one as an example of this, it's important to embrace the very, very different perspectives that come into play.
Thank you so much, Brian, for this complimentary statement. Hubert, would you like to share a few words with us as well?
Yes, sure. What I take out of this Daylight Academy talk, and I think we should all be interested in this platform also, because we already have a place to continue to discuss and meet each other, and in a growing community, is that Daylight at the end of the day is one of the few things which exists in abundance, and it's for free. And we should perhaps consider also that much of what we're dealing with is actually our incapacity to have figured out that we rather have deprived ourselves from daylight. So our environments, regardless if they're man-made or natural, could just respond stronger to this consciousness of this abundantly free resource of daylight. Obviously, we have to protect ourselves sometimes, as Brian also said, from bad temperature, and I would add bad weather. But I think the clarity of that raw material that is here for us could have a stronger effect in our daily life. And for me, and I think that is also extending to the arts and to the nature and to all the people that we have here on the panel, it's a question also of beauty. At the end of the day, it's just something intrinsically beautiful to enjoy daylight. And on the other hand, I think also what Anna is saying again and again, also the nighttime, the absence of daylight. It's a question of bringing that beauty back again in our cities, and working with it. That I would take away from the discussion on my end. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hubert. And I think this connects nicely to the perspective that maybe Jasmine can bring.
Yeah, I have a very similar perspective like Hubert or Anna. I also dream of cities for our children that where the outside space gets as much attention as the inside space. So where we have a close collaboration with architects to build green, gray spaces. And yeah, so to improve our mood and our health, actually. And the mood and health of animals and plants around us, of course.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. And we end with our artist duo, Christina and Roman.
What I would say is, or like it kind of a repetition, is that we have to be, we're getting more and more responsible for everything. And this is something very complicated and very interdisciplinary problem, but it also can have positive effects.
So, and more practical, like also the dream of Jasmine that this more together again, or that these boundaries become less high, you could say, or very nice, Anna, the idea of atrium is also that the outside becomes kind of inside. So it's very nice thoughts, and thanks a lot of you. Not all of you.
Thank you. Also, thank you to all for all these contributions and to this very lively and interesting debate. I think it shows, on the one hand, to what extent daylight is multifaceted and has so many dimensions. And on the other hand, how important it is to bring together different fields, different expertise, different kind of specializations, and really different mindsets to try to promote it's used towards healthier and more sustainable living environments. And I think this panel and its diversity were an illustration of how simply varied the question and the number of perspectives can be. So many thanks for this. We promised a last little game kind of with a reward for those who stayed with us until the end, and you are numerous actually to have stayed until the end, almost all of you. So thank you for staying despite the non-physical format of this webinar. And for that, I would like to invite you to this Mentimeter, and I'll just wait for players to join in. Same procedure as always, use a different code, 52 55 90 0. And now we have interesting icons. Each one corresponds to one of the players. We could have more than 100. I don't know if we will get that many icons. I think we need Marina to work on the drawings. So we will wait a few minutes, and then at some point, once we have enough of you on the board, we will launch the questions. But it was really interesting to have this discussion with you. I felt we could, some of the questions from the audience that I ended up not being able to incorporate were actually one way or another incorporated in our debates, which also I think made it quite relevant and pertinent, and I hope the audience thinks the same. I think I'm a living example of trying to live only with daylight, so my room is very dark, I only have my screen. So now we have the questions. So guess which one of the following statements is wrong? Sufficient exposure to daylight helps us regulate our body clock and increase sleep quality, produce the precious vitamin B that reinforces our immune system, improve our mood and fight depression, or protect our eyes against myopia when we were kids, or when we are kids, if kids have joined us. So we will wait another few seconds, and I hope I will be able to read my screen until the end. It's my only source of light at this point. So we will have another 10 seconds for everyone to try to answer this trick question. And time's up. So yes, unsurprisingly, these two answers got most of the answers. The trick was that it's vitamin D instead of vitamin B. But maybe a good lesson learned is that indeed it is important to protect our eyes against myopia when we are kids. So it's maybe a benefit that we don't talk about enough. So we can probably move on to the next question. Don't forget that you can win a prize. So sunlight is beneficial in many ways, but prolonged exposure also requires protection. Which of these animals is particularly vulnerable to sunburn? So the human is not amongst the choices, and I guess the nature-oriented people in the audience will have a better guess. We have either the giraffe or the elephant, and it is indeed the elephant, which makes him or her get into mud to protect him or herself. So the third question is whether to feel alert during the day, I should rather commute on foot or by bike in the morning, whether I should get up 2 hours earlier than my natural wake-up time for luminotherapy, whether I should keep my blinds as far down as possible to avoid glare and overheating, or whether to have a blue-enriched bedside light to read before going to sleep. So again, hopefully you got some information through this debate on what it means to have a healthy light hygiene. And we have a few seconds left before we will close. 3, 2, 1. And indeed, it's a good idea to commute by foot or by bike, meaning outside, especially in the morning, to shorten our biological day. It's not a good idea to not wake up in your natural time, depending on your chronotype, but we cannot sometimes help it. If you can help it, don't. It's a good idea to keep the blinds up as long as it's not uncomfortable. And it's better to avoid blue enriched bedside lamps, as it will disrupt your circadian phase and not help you sleep, actually. So another question for cinema fans: which of the following actors does not appear in the 1996 American thriller Daylight that may or may not be known to you, which I would say indirectly relates to daylight, but there is something about craving for daylight throughout the movie. So we have either Viggo Mortensen, Chuck Norris, Jay Sanders, or Sylvester Stallone. And time is up. And indeed, the cinema culture is, let's say, evenly distributed. Indeed, only Chuck Norris doesn't appear in this movie. And I think we are getting to one of the last questions. So for a building at northerly latitudes, outside the tropics, which of these statements is wrong? Is it that south-facing windows can cause overheating and glare? Is it that in the summer, solar heat from the zenith opening can be excessive, so from top lighting, from roof lights? Is it that north-facing windows provide insufficient daylight? Or is it that the view out is an important attribute of windows? So we want to make sure that we were talking about latitudes that are more or less known, because of course these answers can change a lot depending on what climate we're talking about and what sun course we are talking about. Time is up. And again, a somewhat balanced set of answers. It's wrong to say that north-facing windows necessarily provide insufficient daylight, because it just provides very stable daylight, except of course in the very early morning and evening in the summer, but it is actually abundant skylight, which oftentimes is more easy to control. And I think this was our last question, and we can therefore see who won over both time, so who was the most rapid and the most accurate. And we have a winner. It is Brian. Congratulations, Brian. Very exciting. I would love to meet you. It's not possible, but you have won a signed copy of Linda Jagger's book, Chasing the Sun, which draws on the last scientific findings and talks about the importance of sunlight for health and well-being, so very topical for today's conversation, with a lot of photographs and a lot of examples from daily life. So I hope you will enjoy the reading. Don't forget to give your contact details to office@daylight.academy. So it would be, it's important to get your details right so that, Brian, we can get you your prize. Thank you very much for participating, to all of you. And it's a very nice way to close now formally this panel session. And therefore, I would like to give the word back to Lydia. But before that, thanking again all the panelists in my name anyway, because I will be leaving the floor, so to speak. It was a pleasure to discuss with all of you and a pleasure to interact with the audience through this webinar. So Lydia, the floor is yours for the closing words.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. And I would like to thank you, all the speakers, and again, you, Marilyn. It was a really interesting discussion, and it was really great to listening to you. I also would like to thank Marina for these amazing drawings and for having actually illustrated the whole Daylight Awareness Week in such a charming way. And finally, I also would like to thank our hosting team, because they did a huge job in the background before and also during the event. And because some of them were not visible, I just would like to share my screen the last time and say a big thank you to Laura Grassi and June Stefano, both from the consulting organization Sense Tribe, which is helping us organizing this event. They was doing the coordination and the technical support in the background. And I also would like to thank Mario Bettizo, my colleague from the Velux Stiftung, which also helped in the background with the questions coming from the audience. So, and now to officially close the Daylight Awareness Week, I am pleased to welcome a special guest, Professor Jean-Luc Garcini. He is director of the Solar Energy and Building Physics Laboratory at the EPFL in Lausanne, and also speaker of the Daylight Academy steering committee. So Jean-Louis, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you. I'm very pleased on behalf of the Daylight Academy Steering Committee as a speaker, and you know the speaker, they like to speak, but I will speak only a few minutes just to be sure you will stay on the screen. Just to say a few closing words and at the end of this Daylight Awareness Week. Lydia said it at the beginning. Actually, you may know now that the main goal of our association is to promote international and interdisciplinary collaboration between professionals, actors of the daylighting field, actually scientists, engineer, architect, artist. And this is the main goal, but also promoting these activities to a wider public so that it can benefit from the latest discoveries and above all the benefits of daylight in terms of health, environment, energy savings, sustainability is also one of the priorities of the association. So today, I think during this roundtable, we're able to see all these facets, all these aspects of the daylight, from the art to the engineering, through the landscape ecology and the architecture and the chronobiology. For sure, I don't need to make a summary because Marilyn and Marina and also the roundtable participant made a beautiful summary of what was said during this 1.5 hours. For sure, it was a rich and fruitful discussion that I learned a lot actually here from my house, and it was very multidisciplinary. This is something that I'm sure you have be able to see. We had a large number of participants, actually about 140, and which is certainly a lot. Very proactive participants, not only for the quiz, but also for the different questions. I think there are more than 40, close to 50 questions on the Q&A. So again, very proactive participant. So again, there's no doubt that daylight plays an essential role in relation to what has been shown today and important challenges for the future of humanity on Earth. In fact, the Daylight Academy, since its creation 4 years ago, has identified 4 main directions of action that we have seen today. Again, from human health to nature, technology, and art. And in these 4 directions, we have defined many needs for investigation or identified many needs for investigation and potential discoveries that we would like to share among specialists, but also with a larger audience. And this is a beginning of what we have done today, or you have done today, was a beginning of that. I think the success of these weekly events, not only today, but the 3 days, and in particular this roundtable, confirmed the general public interest in daylight, as well as in the benefits of daylight, which is again good. The large attendance confirmed the interest of all of you in the themes of this evening. And again, that was definitely great to see it on my screen, on our screen. So with this mind, I would like to urge to follow and participate to the future public events organized for a wide audience, what I mean the non-specialist in daylight, by the Daylight Academy itself, and this will be announced on the DLA website. I also would like to invite the specialists, the professionals in the field of daylight to attend the Daylight Academy annual meeting or annual conference which is also advertised on the DLA website, and to become, why not, a member of our association, which would mean to be a conveyor of daylight in the world, and again through the web as we did it today. So again, in the name of the DLA steering committee, I would like to thank all the participants, all of you, the roundtable participants, but also the people in their home on the webinar, and at the end, and for the attention also at the end of this event. And I would like to give the floor, I would like to give the screen back to Lydia Moreno, and also to thank her for her work, for the very last farewell words. So again, thank you, so long, and see you soon.
Thank you very much, Jean-Luc. So I think, yeah, with this very inspiring last words, we can now close this webinar and close the whole Daylight Awareness Week. So again, also from my side, it was a great pleasure. Thank you all for joining and for contributing also so actively to this important discussion. And yeah, see you soon again for more Daylight Insights. Thank you very much.